Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive into one of the most tragic and controversial events in American history, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. On April 4, 1968, a gunshot rang out in Memphis, silencing one of the most powerful voices for equality and justice the world had ever known. Now, officially, James Earl Ray was convicted of the crime. But the circumstances surrounding King's assassination, the investigation, and even Ray's own later recanting of his confession have fueled countless conspiracy theories for decades. In this series, we're going to unpack some of the most prevalent and persistent of these theories. We'll examine the evidence, the arguments, and the historical context to try to understand why these theories persist and what they tell us about ourselves and our relationship to history. It's important to remember as we go through this that we're dealing with real lives, real tragedy, and real pain. Our goal isn't to sensationalize or to arrive at definitive answers, but to engage in a thoughtful and respectful exploration of a complex and sensitive topic. Let's start with one of the most enduring theories surrounding King's assassination: the idea that James Earl Ray, the man who confessed to the crime, was actually a patsy, an unwitting pawn in a much larger game. Ray, a known petty criminal, did confess to the assassination, which led to a life sentence in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. However, just days later, Ray recanted his confession, claiming he was coerced and pressured into taking the fall. He maintained his innocence until his death in 1998. This quick reversal, along with inconsistencies in the evidence and the investigation, has given fuel to the theory that Ray was set up. Some point to the fact that Ray was, by his own admission, a small-time crook, not a skilled assassin. Could he have really pulled off such a high-profile hit with such apparent precision? And why would he confess if he truly believed he was innocent, unless he was manipulated or threatened into doing so? These questions, while seemingly straightforward, open a Pandora's box of possibilities, each more complicated and controversial than the last. Adding to the intrigue is the mysterious figure of Raoul, a man Ray claimed to have met in Montreal and who he alleged masterminded the assassination. Ray insisted that Raoul was the one who provided him with the rifle and instructions, implicating a larger conspiracy. While investigators dismissed Raoul as a figment of Ray's imagination or a desperate attempt to deflect blame, some researchers and theorists believe he may have been a real person, possibly connected to organized crime or even government agencies. Fueling these suspicions are reports of a second unidentified man seen near King's motel room around the time of the shooting. Witnesses described a man matching Raoul's description fleeing the scene, which contradicts the official narrative that Ray acted alone. Whether Raoul was a real person or a fabrication, his presence in the story, however nebulous, further muddies the waters and raises more questions than answers. Was Ray telling the truth, or was he grasping at straws to save himself? Of course, the theory that Ray was a patsy isn't without its critics. Those who support the official narrative point to the fact that Ray was seen in Memphis in the days leading up to the assassination, that he purchased a rifle matching the one used in the crime, and that he fled the scene immediately after the shooting. They argue that Ray's changing story and claims of coercion are simply the desperate attempts of a guilty man to avoid responsibility for his actions. They also point to the thoroughness of the investigation, which included a team of forensic experts and ballistics analysis that linked the murder weapon to Ray. Furthermore, while there are inconsistencies in witness testimonies, as there often are in complex cases, several eyewitnesses did place Ray at the scene of the crime. The official investigation, known as the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded in 1979 that Ray was indeed the lone gunman, and that there was no evidence of a larger conspiracy. Despite these official findings, the doubts persist, and as we'll see, these doubts are fueled by other compelling, if controversial, theories. One of the most unsettling theories surrounding King's assassination is the possibility that the U.S. government itself was involved. Proponents of this theory argue that King, with his growing influence and increasingly radical message, was perceived as a threat to the established order, a danger to national security, and a target for surveillance and neutralization. By the late 1960s, King had moved beyond his focus on racial equality in the South and had begun to challenge systemic poverty in the Vietnam War, issues that put him in direct opposition to the policies of the federal government. His calls for economic justice and his outspoken criticism of the war made him a target of both the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, who saw him as a dangerous radical. The FBI, under Hoover's direction, had been monitoring King for years, wiretapping his phones, placing informants in his inner circle, and even sending him threatening letters in an attempt to discredit and silence him. This campaign of harassment and intimidation, documented in declassified FBI files, suggests a deep-seated animosity towards King and his message. This context has led some to believe that the government, or at least elements within the government, might have had the motive and the means to silence King permanently. Adding fuel to the fire is the FBI's own history of covert operations aimed at disrupting and discrediting domestic political organizations. The program, known as Cointelpro, was active throughout the 1960s and targeted a wide range of groups, including civil rights organizations, anti-war activists, and even suspected communists. Cointelpro utilized a range of tactics, including infiltration, disinformation, legal harassment, and even violence, to disrupt and discredit these groups. The program's existence, revealed through Senate hearings in the 1970s, showed a willingness on the part of the government to engage in illegal and unethical activities to achieve its aims. Given this historical context, it's not entirely implausible to consider the possibility that similar tactics might have been used against King. Could the FBI, with its history of covert operations and its deep animosity towards King, have been involved in his assassination? While there's no direct evidence to support this claim, the possibility, however unsettling, lingers, casting a shadow of suspicion over the official narrative. It's important to note that much of the evidence connecting the government to King's assassination is circumstantial. While the FBI's harassment of King is a matter of public record, there's no smoking gun, no direct order linking the agency to the assassination itself. Critics of the government conspiracy theory argue that suspicion and conjecture are not enough to overturn the official findings. They point out that while the FBI may have disliked King and his message, there's a significant difference between surveilling someone and orchestrating their murder. Furthermore, they argue that if the government had wanted to silence King, they had plenty of opportunities to do so without resorting to assassination. They could have easily used their vast resources to discredit him, imprison him, or even drive him into exile. However, for many, the timing of King's death, the FBI's documented hostility towards him, and the historical context of government overreach continue to raise troubling questions. We've examined theories surrounding the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., James Earl Ray being a patsy and the U.S. government's potential motive. Some believe these theories are part of a larger puzzle. This is where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean terrifying. The theory posits a meticulously planned operation. Imagine a web of covert operations and shadowy figures. Sounds like a Cold War spy thriller, right? But some historical events lend credence to this theory. Remember Cointelpro? This FBI program targeted domestic political organizations. And guess who was a primary target? Martin Luther King Jr. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, saw King as a threat. If we entertain the possibility, even just for a moment, that King's assassination was part of a broader government conspiracy, we're stepping into a very different understanding of American history. This isn't just about one man's death. It's about the potential subversion of democracy itself. Think about it. If the government was willing to orchestrate the assassination of a prominent civil rights leader like Martin Luther King Jr., what else were they capable of? What other events, shrouded in mystery and speculation, might be connected to this alleged conspiracy? And perhaps most importantly, what does it say about the nature of power and the lengths to which those in power might go to maintain control? These are not easy questions to grapple with, and there are no easy answers. But they are questions we must ask if we are to fully understand the complexities of the past and their implications for the present. The implications of a larger government conspiracy extend far beyond the assassination itself. It suggests a willingness to operate outside the bounds of law and morality, to silence dissent through any means necessary. It challenges the very foundations of trust in government and raises profound questions about accountability and justice. Now, it's important to acknowledge that evidence directly linking King's assassination to a broader government conspiracy remains largely circumstantial. While the existence of programs like Cointelpro highlights the government's willingness to engage in covert operations against its own citizens, concrete proof connecting these activities to King's death remains elusive. Some argue that the lack of direct evidence is, in itself, evidence of a cover-up, a deliberate attempt to erase any trace of government involvement. Others maintain that the absence of proof is just that, an absence of proof. They argue that attributing King's assassination to a larger conspiracy relies on speculation and conjecture rather than concrete evidence. So, where does that leave us? Are we to believe that a network of powerful individuals orchestrated this assassination as part of a grand scheme to maintain control? Or are we to accept the official narrative despite lingering questions and inconsistencies? The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in between. Unraveling the mysteries of the past requires careful examination of available evidence, a critical eye towards official narratives, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. unfolded against a backdrop of social and political upheaval. But there was another force at play in America during this era, one that often operated in the shadows: organized crime. And according to some, the Mafia had its own reasons for wanting Martin Luther King Jr. silenced. Now, the idea that the mob might have been involved in King's assassination isn't as far-fetched as it might initially seem. After all, organized crime has a long and sordid history of using violence and intimidation to protect its interests. And in the 1960s, those interests often intersected with the world of politics, law enforcement, and even civil rights. To fully understand the theory of Mafia involvement, we need to examine the potential motives and connections. What would the Mafia have to gain from silencing Martin Luther King Jr.? Some argue that King's focus on economic justice threatened the mob's control over unions, gambling, and other illicit businesses. Others point to King's moral authority, suggesting that his message of equality and justice undermined the culture of corruption that the Mafia thrived on. Still, others believe that the Mafia might have been acting on behalf of powerful allies who saw King as a threat to their own interests. The challenge with this theory, like many others, lies in establishing concrete connections. While the Mafia undoubtedly wielded considerable power and influence, proving their direct involvement in King's assassination has proven difficult. There's no smoking gun, no signed confession, no irrefutable evidence that definitively links the mob to the crime. And yet, the theory persists, fueled by the Mafia's reputation for ruthlessness and their documented history of interfering in political affairs. The theory of Mafia involvement in King's assassination presents a tangled web of possibilities. Did the mob act alone, driven by their own motives to silence a perceived threat? Or were they merely pawns in a larger game, carrying out the orders of more powerful figures who sought to maintain the status quo? Some proponents of this theory point to the fact that James Earl Ray, the man convicted of King's murder, claimed he was framed, a pawn in a larger conspiracy. Could the Mafia have been the puppet master behind Ray's alleged involvement, using him as a fall guy to deflect suspicion from themselves and their powerful allies? The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. remains one of the most significant and controversial events in American history, and the possibility of Mafia involvement adds yet another layer of complexity to an already perplexing case. While concrete evidence remains elusive, the theory persists, fueled by the Mafia's documented history of violence, corruption, and manipulation. Was the Mafia solely responsible for King's death? Or were they part of a more extensive network of powerful forces that conspired to silence one of history's most influential voices? These questions continue to haunt us, a reminder that some truths remain elusive, lost in the shadows of the past. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was a pivotal moment in American history, a tragic loss that continues to resonate today. While James Earl Ray was convicted, numerous conspiracy theories persist, offering alternative explanations for King's death. We've delved into the possibility of U.S. government involvement, driven by a desire to silence King's influence. The most important takeaway isn't about solving the mystery, but understanding his profound impact and legacy. As we grapple with King's legacy, let us strive to honor his memory by pursuing his dream of a just world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.